Hello everyone, welcome to an all new episode of Reality Bytes. Today I again have a guest who needs no introduction. It's Dr. Vikram Sampath. He is a historian and an author par excellence. And for the rest of his bio, you should buy his book because even I'm going through his bio in the book, which is almost as long as the book itself. So thank you so much, Vikram. Thank you for being here and taking out the time. I know your schedule has been insane.
It has been, and sorry to have rushed through this and also kept you waiting for so long.
That's fine. That's
Waiting for
okay.
Shiva is the title
Waiting
of the
for
book, so
Shiva.
waiting for the
Waiting
author.
for Shiva's author. So, my first question. I was infuriated while reading this book. Infuriated. I almost had to put the book down multiple times just to calm myself down before I pick it up again.
Why?
Because the cycle of destruction which continued over and over again, and resilience of the Hindus to a point where resilience itself became infuriating. That how many times are Hindus supposed to do this? How difficult was it for you to write this book? Because I know you finished it really quickly.
Yeah.
How difficult was it?
Terrible, very, very difficult. And like you, even just going through the bare facts of so many destruction waves, not only of the deity and the temple, but in several other occasions of cow slaughter, so many things, grotesque details that come forth in the book. You can't keep a sane mind. And I was working on record speed for this book, so working till 4 or 5 in the morning. Sleep had almost left me, and very often, even in my dreams, I think I would see some shivlinga, some dilapidated structures, and all of that. It was literally an obsession for several months while I was writing this. But then that's the thing, Nupur, that a historian is called on to become a moral eunuch. Where he or she should not ideally take a stand. If it is itihasa, as it thus happened, you're just documenting facts and illuminating the records and the archive for the masses. So my value judgments or my angst or my anger in this, unlike a journalist who can put a perspective, ideally a historian should not do. We're not here to judge incidents or people of the past, because the standards are very different. So that emotional distance with the subject and the events is something I've tried not only in this book but others also. And I hope as a reader that anger or angst or frustration didn't come through. It was as dry to the extent possible, but that makes it tougher. You're absorbing all that anger within yourself. So that part was tough, I must admit.
The book itself is a dry retelling of history, but I felt the angst in the introduction.
Yeah.
I felt the angst when you spoke about how, we've been forced to sort of sever our umbilical cord with our history and sacrifice it at the altar of secularism.
Yeah.
And how you spoke about Ayodhya.
Yes.
It is not easy, I would imagine, for somebody like you to be so forthcoming about history itself, because that hasn't been the norm. When I remember the barrage of vilification and abuse that came your way. How difficult is it for you to be this ideologically and factually forthcoming when it's not the norm for historians, since most of them are left historians, the entire cabal of left historians who you counter in this book as well. But how difficult has it been to be this forthcoming about what you think?
So all the anger or the angst that I felt for the rest of the chapters, that had to come out somewhere. And I was writing that prologue, the introduction, at the time the Pran Pratishtha was going on. So I think everything combined, the fervor that the country was seeing, you can't be oblivious to it. You can't be immune to what you're seeing all around you. And at the same time, you're seeing the story of another sacred site whose history you're trying to document and chronicle. So somewhere that had to be let out. But let me tell you, it has been a very, very difficult and a lonely journey in the whole, historiography that I've been doing for the last 16 years. It's been 16 years now. People think, okay, he started writing now and so on. My first book came out in 2008, long before winds of political change blew over this country. Since then to now, it's, unless you subscribe to that cabal, you really do not, climb the ladders and get to where you need to and so on. But it never bothered me even then. It doesn't bother me even now. But I think, when I feel low and down about it, I just look back and see on whose shoulders we are standing to come and chronicle this today. Right from, of course, the veterans R.C. Majumdar and Sir Jadunath Sarkar and others. Post independence, the kind of people, Sitaram Goel ji or Dharampal ji, Ram Swarup ji, Arun Shourie, Coenrad Elst, Meenakshi Jain, all these people who have, it was much more difficult than what it is today. I think we are still beneficiaries of a favorable climate, politically, socially, culturally. There is awakening among people. They were doing this in the 50s, 60s, 70s when you could pay a very, very heavy price for that.
Yeah.
And they still continue doggedly. So every time I used to feel low and down and lonely, I would look back and draw inspiration from them. And that's probably one reason why I have also formed this foundation for Indian historical and cultural research to foster new scholarship in history. Ensure that fellowships are given to younger scholars who can start writing. We already did one batch, a kind of a pilot project with Asha Motwani through the Jadeja Motwani Foundation. It was called Rajiv Circle Scholars for Indian History. And the first outcome of that, a book by Abhas Maldayar on Babar, that's already out. And we've given it out to 7 people. So just imagine every year, 5, 6, 7 new books written from a totally fresh perspective comes out. And I always keep emphasizing this, that in the civilizational battle, at least on the academic front, scholarship is the only alternative. As much as people may fight on Twitter and other X or other social media platforms, those I think are very ephemeral. You can take screenshots, put there and have cat fights, get brownie points somewhere. But finally, at the end of the day, if the system has to change, you need to have books. And as a writer, I'd like to believe that our books are going to outlive us 100, 200 years after I'm dead and gone. I hope and wish that my books will be read. And so in the non-left circles, this is our usual pastime, right? We sit and have one voodoo doll and put pins to Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, D.N. Jha. You can do that till the cows come home. But they have done their work, all of them, good or bad. They've created a vast body of scholarship. If you keep saying, let's remove Romila Thapar's books from university syllabus or UPSC, training, what do you replace it with? Who has written an alternative version of ancient Indian history or medieval Indian history or the freedom movement or anything? And that speaks a lot of the intellectual rigor on the left too, where, it was difficult in the past, I agree, because systems were so deeply entrenched and captured by them. But now there should be no excuse. Even now, if all that we do is in our own preaching to the converted conclaves, we sit and keep demonizing these people or don't do anything other than social media keyboard warriors. I think we are going to be doing a great disservice to the opportunity that history has offered us today. And that's why scholarship is the only and only alternative if you have to move the needle by any inch in this particular case.
Now, coming to the book,
yes,
I don't want to get into too many details because I want people to actually buy the book and read it instead of just listening to this podcast and considering themselves read.
Yeah.
But you've detailed in painstaking you've added all sorts of details about the significance of Kashi in the book, and how despite being looted and plundered right from Aibak to Razia Sultan and Sikandar Lodi, the seers and businessmen and kings, from the north to south to east to west, kept attempting to revive Kashi Vishwanath as a temple and Kashi as a holy city as well. And you say something very interesting. You say that you ask the question in your book, what made people hold on to this generational memory of the significance of Kashi? And then you go on to say that it's perhaps the essence of being Indian.
Yes.
What do you think is that essence of being Indian that kept us going back to Kashi to revive the significance of that city?
Yeah, that's a great question. Kashi is a place among all our other Tirthasthans. Of course, the Moksha Nagaris, the 7 Moksha Nagaris that are there. In that, one of the primal centers has been Kashi. And all the Indic faiths, the preponderance or the need for nirvana, whether it's in the Buddhist or the Jain traditions, or for us moksha, salvation, moksha, that's been something very quintessential to a spiritual quest, right? We are not looking for afterlife frolicking in some other space. We're looking for union with with our creator. So that in such a scenario, these moksha nagaris, and particularly Kashi, where I've mentioned that in the Skanda Puran, Bhagwan Shiv himself, assures or gives a promise. It's a guarantee that he gives that come what may, anybody who leaves their mortal coil here in Kashi, as the soul leaves the body and comes out, he himself will come and whisper the Taraka Rama mantra in their ears and assure the soul that it will go to the Sadgati. So this was a lottery ticket that nobody would want to, lose out on. So the Puranas have that macabre, description that if at all you go there, ask someone to break off your legs so that your legs don't carry you and run away from it, because your mind may play games with you. And when you've gone to the best place, which assures you of liberation, why would you want to do that? So that was the quintessential importance of the place, which had this Swayambhu Jyotirlinga, self-manifested Jyotirlinga of effulgence in a city which itself, Kashi, the word itself comes from the luminous city, the shining city, the city of light, as Diana Eck also called it. So in such a scenario, all through, and so I think what through the book I would like to convey is this reclamation drive or the cases we are seeing. It's not something that has started now. It is not inspired completely by some political party or ideological cohorts today or through some court cases. Our ancestors have been fighting this for centuries, and they've been doing it against the worst of odds. And today we are in a much better space where we are in independent India, where there's a rule of law. They were doing it under much more difficult circumstances. When the whole city was in ruins, for Brahmin families from Maharashtra to go there and re-establish and create a renaissance, what sort of challenges would that have come about for these people to go right in the heart of the Delhi Sultanate and restart scholarship, restart that consciousness? So today, a lot of people, so-called secular Hindus also, would say, let's give it up. What is the big deal? We anyway have a corridor now, which is so much big. Ye chota sa this thing, why do we need that also? No, we would want every inch of it back, because our ancestors didn't give up. And our traditions always, right from the Pitru Tarpans that we do to the Pitru Paksh, we owe a debt to our ancestors. And for that, this temple and several others become very important.
So I've said this, a lot of times, that reclamation of temples and our deities is almost like a Pitru Rin.
Yes.
It is incumbent upon us.
Yes.
To fulfill the dreams of our ancestors.
And which is why nobody has the right to say just 3 and no further. And I mean, it's somebody else's Pitru Rin. Who gives anyone or makes anyone the spokesperson for the entire Hindu community to give away something? So we try as much as possible, wherever the evidence can be built, foolproof. For that, the work has to be done.
Right.
The Hindu community is also, truth be told, very lazy. We just sit and talk a lot, we outrage and do all that. A lot of hard work, like, you can't write a book on each of those sites, but all the important sites. What is the quantum of, historical, literary, epigraphic, archaeological evidence that can be marshaled, and dossiers should be created saying these are the things that we want reclaimed, and these are the, priority areas of our reclamation.
So I was going to come to that question later.
Okay.
But since you've touched upon it, I think we should dive straight into it, and then we can come to the other details of the book. There is this argument that, as you said, reclaim the 3 most important temples and don't find a shivling in every mosque, as one of our leaders said. Also, there is another side of the argument that says that if we can only prove continuity of worship in a certain place of worship, should we attempt to reclaim that temple if it has been like in the constant generational memory of Hindus, like Kashi?
Yeah.
Now, my problem is, and again, this was another question, that our record of history hasn't been as impeccable as the Jews, for example. We haven't been able to record our own persecution and the desecration of our own temples as well. And therefore, for many sites, proving the continuity in generational memory might be difficult.
Yes.
So, how do we draw that line and how do we decide which temples should or should not be reclaimed? And do you believe that we should just stop after 3?
No, not for that. It's an emphatic no. And yeah, if there is a shivling or there's a murti under any other structure, including a mall, we should keep looking for it. Nobody has the right to give it away to anybody else. That is out of at least my table. But for the other answer, there is no easy. It's a very complicated subject. And I don't know how people would take my own interpretation of it. As a historian, I'm talking about it. Because one is, we don't know even the numbers, right? In this book itself, in the very first attack on Kashi, when Kutubuddin Aibak attacks the place, Hassan Nizami, the chronicler, says 1,000 temples in Kashi were destroyed. Now he mentions the number 1,000, but which are those 1,000? Where were they located? Today, if I come to you and say I want to reclaim it, you are going to naturally ask me, can you tell me the list? Can you have a catalogue? So there are various numbers floating around. So Sitaramji, about whom we spoke, we know what Hindu temples, what happened to them, about less than 2,000 something is there, 1826 or something like that. Some people say 20,000, some people say 40,000. 40,000 may seem like an inflated number, but it simply doesn't seem too bad. It's an estimate, because I think Sitaramji also in his book says this is at the tip of the iceberg at the least. So if in one attack 1,000 temples could have been destroyed, over 1,000 years of Islamic rule, obviously 40,000 is a very small number that could be destroyed. But the problem then becomes, so for bravado it is very nice to say I will take all the 40,000 back, but do you even know where the 40,000 are? Then you see whether there is scriptural evidence. And I would also somewhere veer to that thought process, that unless there is continuous worship, it is very difficult to say I want it back, because 700, 800 years ago, suppose that place was completely desecrated and our ancestors also gave up on it. Today, raking that up might not be feasible also. It's a case-to-case basis. There's no one size fits all. So that's why I said the Hindu side needs to do a lot of work, which we generally otherwise don't. We need to dirty our hands, and research groups of historians, archaeologists, scholars, media people, thought leaders should go into the details as to what are our priority areas, and that number could be anything between 3 to 40,000 or even more, whatever the list. So even before you approach the other side for a reclamation drive, first have your house in order, have your scholarship ready. And without that scholarship, just throwing numbers and saying, so 40,000 temples, are we going to have 40,000 cases, which our great grandchildren also will be fighting, and there'll be ASI surveys all the time through the next 4-5 generations. That's also something we need to consider, as India is poised for greatness on all fronts. We need to come to a truth and reconciliation. This work would be a truth and reconciliation commission for the country, which we never had. And then it should be like a full and final settlement. And I know in the process, maybe some may be given up on, or on various criteria. So right now, as I said, it's no clear answer as to how and what to do. Every case would be case by case basis. Some even public memory may have gone away, right? There may be scriptural reference, but if the people don't care for that site, are you still going to go behind that and create unrest where none exists? So there could be cases like that too, right? Historically, there may be a gazetteer record, but the people of that after 4 generations, the oral memories, intergenerational memories too have not even existed. On what basis you're doing it for the people of that place? If they only don't care, what will that lead to? So as I said, there's no easy one size fits all solution for this. It needs a lot of nuance. It needs a lot of thought that we all also need to put together before we rush to the media and social media to make proud claims and tall claims. It needs to be thought out very well. It needs to be a strategic thing rather than announce it first and then work. I think quietly for a couple of years. Right now, as people like Vishnu Jain ji and Hari Shankar Jain ji and others are doing such yeoman service in getting these places out, let them do their work. Knowing the pace of our legal system, it may take a couple of years. Use that gestation period to build a case for the others and also prioritize your list. Make your research and your historical knowledge impeccable, and then we'll see. We never thought a day will come when we'll see the Ayodhya Mandir. We saw it in our lifetimes. We were fortunate. So we don't know 5 years down the line what the scenario of this country will be, how the climate, political, social, cultural climate will be. So, but by then, a preparation, a strategy, a roadmap is essential before one starts shooting your mouth and making tall claims. Till then, let's concentrate, work, bit by bit, rather than plunging into the ocean and making a mess
Being
of everything.
lost.
But in the process, I would also, these subtle threats that keep getting given, that there'll be a lot of unrest. I think those should just be disregarded, because we saw that even if Article 370 goes, the Kashmir will go in flames, there will be a civil war, all kinds of things were there. Luckily, none of that happened. There's been a turnaround in Kashmir, as we've been seeing. So some things are just threats and nothing else. But it also underscores this, brute street veto power that some communities like to exercise in this country, where even a parliament passed a law like a CAA will not be implemented, and on the roads it will be determined that this will not be enacted. So there needs to be some political strategy also how to deal with this. So it's a very complex issue, and one must really, I would urge all our intellectuals and thinkers to think before they speak on this issue, because it will just, I think, mess up things for the whole cause itself, is my fear, which should not happen. We have a great case to build on. Best is not to spoil it with I think there's a lot of excitement, particularly after Ayodhya, to say that you'd rather think and talk rather than get into excitement and repent later.
So what you're saying is the scholarship has to be built. Each temple that we identify, we have to have our historical evidence before we can decide how many temples to reclaim.
Exactly, and you can imagine how difficult a task that is, and how many people would need to be involved in that. So if you're going the court way for each of these, there are only two ways to reclaim it. Either you go through an out-of-court settlement, which would mean that the other community needs to be on board, which I doubt. But even if there is any mediation possible, even then you need information. Now, if you're dragging the case to court and filing 40,000 cases over the next 1,000 years, even for that you will need evidence. Court, you will need more evidence. So just imagine the amount of background work that needs to be done before you mobilize the entire country on a cause as important as this.
So it's interesting you bring up street veto, and it's also interesting that you bring up negotiation, which you think might not happen with the Muslim community.
May or may not.
May or may not. History says it probably won't.
Well, I must also mention that someone I know and deeply revere, Sri Ravi Shankar, during the Ayodhya time also, I think he had negotiated and spoken to almost 800 plus imams. And he had pretty good things to say, that a lot of them are conciliatory and sane if one puts it in a manner that it can be conciliatory. In the Ayodhya case, I think the main villains of the piece were some of these leftist historians, who and even K.K. Mohammed in his book Gyan or Bharadiyan, he says that they were conciliatory, saying this is so sacred a spot for the Hindus. It's nothing great emotions associated with a place which is called Masjid-e-Janam Sthan. So we'll give it away. So, but then these people, and none of them have paid a price for it, for all the subterfuge, for the lies, for the lying on oath in courts. These people are still celebrated today as eminent historians, and every word coming out of their mouth treated as gospel truth. Even during this case, as Gyanvapi was gathering steam, I think a month or two ago, there was Irfan Habib who came
Yes.
on the Quint and said he first of all conceded that yeah, there was a Aurangzeb destroyed a temple, but वो शिवजी का मंदिर था या नहीं पता नहीं है. Arey, Masir Alamgiri itself says,
Yeah.
that he destroyed all the temples, including Bishnath ka mandir. Bishnath, Shivji nahi to aur kaun ho sakte hain.
Yeah.
So these are all ploys to, give that segue to say, no, that's the usual Marxist ploy. There's a Buddhist shrine, there's
Yeah.
something else, Jain, for which in the rest of the year, the Buddhist claims never come to the fore.
Yeah.
Only when the Hindus make a claim, suddenly the Buddhist stupas will start appearing from nowhere, and that too in the minds and fabrications of these leftist historians. And so that it does become a problem.
The problem with negotiation was, I think, throughout the years, if even Sitaram Goel's book,
Yeah.
What Hindu temples and what happened to them, he writes in the preface itself that when the negotiation started, one of the concessions which was being given to the Muslim community was that, all right, we'll stick to this and we'll let go of our claim on the others.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, one of the carrots that the Hindu community has continually tried to give the Muslim community as far as reconciliation and negotiation is concerned. Thankfully, it did not go through. But when negotiation is a subject of discussion, I'm always fearful that the Hindu community is going to end up saying, all right, give us these three and we won't ask for the rest.
Yeah.
And that becomes a danger.
Correct.
Whether it's Sri Ravi Shankar, whether it was L.K. Advani ji, as written by
Subramanian
Sitaram.
Swami,
Yeah.
so
Or, this is like a running theme
Correct.
of negotiation.
Correct. And in a negotiation, the basic tenet is you start from a maximalist position.
Yeah.
You say, give us all the 40,000, maybe you'll end up with 40.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
Hindus sort of do the opposite. We
Yeah,
start with the minimum position.
Yeah.
But even in your book, so, you've spoken about how Peshwa Madhav Rao won. He spoke about Kashi and feeding the Brahmins in Kashi in his will because they could not reclaim the temple. And then it is also evident that the negotiations failed because right after that you talk about the negotiations with the British, which fell through. Now, simultaneously, you also talk about one incident. It's a massive part of the book. It spans over 10 pages, and it really bothered me. The pillar of Bhairav and that entire episode of the Muslims slaughtering the cow, spilling the blood everywhere, so on and so forth. I want to understand what is the balance between exercising street power, which the Hindus have done in history as far as temples are concerned. Even in Kashi, you have detailed how the Rajputs then, took revenge, how the Rajputs stood there trying to protect the temple, and how the Mohammedan aggression was. And at the same time, negotiations have failed over and over and over again. Even in court, the cases in court today, if you talk about Ayodhya, I personally believe that it reached the court and we could reclaim the temple because there was an exercise of street power by the Hindus.
Yeah.
In Kashi, there is a popular sentiment that, we are fighting only in the court and we haven't exercised any street veto or street power. But through your book, it is very evident that a lot of blood has been spilled to keep Kashi alive.
True.
So how do you make this, draw this balance between the exercise of street power, whether it's in defense or in protection, versus negotiation?
Yeah, so of course, that was a different era because other than the Rajputs and the Gosains during the Lat Bhairo riots, there's an unverified source that first time when Aurangzeb sent his armies, 1659, he demolished the Krittivaseshwara temple in Kashi. But after that, 1654,
the Naga Sadhus,
1664, the Naga Sadhus of the Mahanirvani Akhada, they're supposed to have defeated Aurangzeb's army. That's something to say about our. And these were the same people who went on to, bring out the Sannyasi rebellion, whether it was in Bengal, and that largely goes undocumented, by the way, in history. Other than Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's, documentation of that, we don't know what the Sannyasi rebellion is all about. So the armed ascetics, which several British scholars have written about, we really don't have much information. So I think that Kshatriya spirit somewhere has totally gone off the Hindu psyche, and that need not always be aggressive, violent means only, but a lot of times you need to show the power, not necessarily exercise it always, and that also we have not done over, I think, decades and decades of preponderance with ahimsa and all that. It almost emasculated that way to say we will not even pick the arms. So I think now things are changing, where it's a combination of both, sam dam dand bhed. It's there's no how much percentage of which is very unclear, but I think a little bit of all is what is needed to convince and cajole, coerce, various techniques to be used to actually get to your objective. Yeah.
We didn't speak about the incident itself of the Pillar of Bhairav.
Yeah.
So, when you mention Rajputs, I don't think a lot of people would understand. So, if you could just touch upon it a little bit,
Yeah.
and tell us what really happened, how the Rajputs protected it, and what was also the Brahmin reaction
Yes.
after that episode, which was very interesting. We were discussing
Yeah.
it right before the interview.
So, so this place of the Vishwanath Mandir and its precincts had always been contested. It was never given up, even after, right from the first desecration in 1194. Successive waves of iconoclasm. Every time a new shrine would resurface, and that would be broken, in its close proximity, another shrine would come up. Now, the things reached a flashpoint in 1809, 1810, which in British colonial records is called the Lat Bhairo riots, where initially, so that area in and around the Lat Bhairav, which is still there, the Kapal Mochan Tirth, the kund that is there in Kashi, close to the mandir, and so there was a demand to actually get that broken, because that is also occupied by in close proximity by another mosque. And so the Julahas, or the weaver community of the Muslims, they tried to desecrate that, and in retaliation there was a Hindu retaliation, then a huge mob of Muslims under this Dost Muhammad and his friends. They come there and they try to break the Vishwanath temple itself, and then there is this anger among the Hindus which bubbles over that day, and a huge army of the Rajputs under Ratan Singh, one of the Rajput leaders, they guard the Vishwanath temple, and they drive these people, defeat them, and send them away. It's pitched battle. The British government is in alarm as to what's going on. And while these people are pushed back, and by then the Lat Bhairav is unprotected, they go there and desecrate the Lat Bhairav. A cow is slaughtered there, and the blood is splashed all over the place, including the Kapal Mochan Tirth, and that sends a wave of
even
disquiet,
the Ganga, right?
the Ganga.
Yeah.
And so the wave of disquiet, especially among the Brahmin community, men and women sit in fast unto death, saying, our Ganga is desecrated now, and so on. And the British literally have to come and cajole them to end their fast, and that they will do everything to purify it again. And the Lat Bhairav is actually reassembled and put in a case and all of that by the British commissioner. And while that is happening, the Rajputs and the Gosais and others, they decide that we will not take this lying down. And the eyewitness account says that night nobody slept in Banaras. The buzz was there all through the night in the bazaars, in the homes, and so on. And several mosques were demolished after that. The Gyanvapi Mosque itself was set on fire, and the Muslims were completely evacuated from that place. Even I think a pig was slaughtered in the mosque, and
on the bodies,
on the bodies of so several such things were done by both sides. And looking at all of this, I think the British Watson, who was the collector, he gives a very sensible thing, which is probably what we're looking for 200 years later. He said this place of Vishwanath and the entire complex, it is something so sacred to the Hindus, which has been mentioned in their scriptures for thousands of years. It doesn't mean much, that area, just that real estate, for that ego of holding on to real estate is one thing. But other than that, that exact spot is not so sacred to the Muslims. So let's evacuate them completely from that spot and give this off to the Hindus, so as to have everlasting peace between the communities. That was a solution which we're looking for now, whether it is in Ayodhya or here, which Mr. Watson had suggested as the collector of Banaras right then. But there was another man, Mr. Bird, who comes and creates more trouble, saying, no, let's not do this, they'll feel bad. So let's try to negotiate. Let the mosque also remain, and this also remains. The compound in and around that is common space, which will be owned by the government, British government, and that later becomes the seed of further trouble, because there's never enough, right? I mean, you give the mosque away, then there'll be overflow of people, and that's what leads to another case in 1936 with the Deen Muhammad versus the state, where people overflow for Alvida namaz on the last Jummah of Ramzan, and say we want the entire space, we want more, we want more. So you're encroaching more and more and more of even government land, and that's how that case is between. It's a non-representative suit, as in the Hindus were not made a party to it, but it's between the Muslims and the British government. So in all of that, we also get to know two very important things. One is the property title of this mosque, so-called mosque. First of all, Gyanvapi Mosque itself is a misnomer and an oxymoron. It's a Sanskrit word which means well of knowledge. So how could that be for a mosque? But be it as it may, two things that come through with all this legal contestation, and the British courts adjudicated it. This place was not a Waqf property. There was no records. There are no records even now of it being a Waqf property. Now, Waqf is where there is a Waqif or a donor who needs to own that property to be able to donate it to somebody. Now, I can't sell away something that doesn't belong to me. That's like Bunty Bubbly film where two people go and sell the Taj Mahal. So, which doesn't belong to them anyway. So this is a similar case. So Aurangzeb might have ordered to demolish that temple, but there is no farman of him donating it in perpetuity to Allah, which is what a Waqf thing does. So there is no Waqf deed or Waqf property for this. The second is Islamic jurisprudence itself, which the British courts, quote. And they say that in Islamic law, if you usurp place from someone else and you do it by force, namaz and so on there, that is not Kabul. It's haram. And so in this case, there is no consent letter which the Hindus or the Hindu Rajas have not sold it to any Muslim party. So it is an illegal encroachment of an pre-existing Hindu structure, which is why on both these counts, whether it is legal property rights or Islamic jurisprudence, this so-called structure or mosque is an illegal structure, so to say. And so for that reason also, I mean, I'm not a legal expert in the manner that some others are, but then from my own reading of all of these, even the Places of Worship Act, which we keep quoting, and which is what I think the courts are doing, and that's why this is not being barred, the religious character of this place by the time of independence was itself suspect. It was running up to 1942. There were cases going on which said, what is the religious structure? It is not a Waqf property. In its tehkhana or cellar, you had this puja, which is now restored, which was going on. On the walls of the mosque where the Khandahar is, the western wall relics, you had Ma Shringar Gauri's Pratima, which women were worshipping 365 days of the year. Now, all of this was summarily stopped, again, in contravention of Places of Worship Act by Mulayam Singh Yadav's government in 1993. So, on multiple counts, the religious character of this structure being suspect. So, that's also one reason why, people saying this is barred by Places of Worship and all that does not hold water.
It sounds great for legal arguments, of course, but if we go by Islamic jurisprudence, then most of the namaz happening in India is haram, as of now. So
I shall zip it on that.
So it's good for the song and dance.
Nupur Sharmas of this country are very outspoken.
No, but it's true then, right? Because most of the mosques are on the remains of temples, and therefore most of their namaz is haram. So I don't know what they're doing. But anyway, one sentence that I absolutely loved in your book, and it got me thinking for hours together, is when you talk about Prithviraj Chauhan and Jaychand. And you say that each one thought it was someone else's battle at that time. And it was that enmity which then led to Gauri's attack, and then it led to Aibak's attack, and so on and so forth. I'd actually like to read a small passage. I've written it down. It's page 39. So in this, you write about, how the Ghazi and, sent his slave, Kutubuddin, to make war against the princes of Hind.
Mm.
And you go on about that. Now, anybody who reads your book will know of the Islamic invasions and the Islamic aggression against Kashi and
Yeah.
Kashi Vishwanath, the temple. But how much was inter-clan enmity a deciding factor of Kashi not being reclaimed? Not just of Prithviraj Chauhan and Jaichand, but generally, how much was inter-clan enmity a factor in Kashi not being reclaimed till date?
No, I don't think that was a factor, historically at least.
Hmm.
Now, even on this whole inter dynastic, troubles that we had, we must remember, and in my previous book, Brave Hearts of Bharat, too, I've documented that, where we had the first invasion, Islamic invasion in Arab invasion in Sindh in 712 CE. Now, by then, within less than half a century of the passing away of the Prophet, the armies of the Caliph had gone across, Northern Africa, Middle East, Persia, and from the Atlantic to the very gates of India, in a very short span of time, it got Islamized, and an Islamic Sultanate was established, a caliphate was established everywhere, with the brute might of the sword. Whereas in India, from the time the first Arab invasion happened in 712, it took 500 years to establish the first Islamic Sultanate. And that says something about the pushback and resistance. 500 is not a small period of time. For 500 years, though they were internecine, wars and dynasties and all that, people were forming alliances. And I document that here also a bit, and in that previous book, where, Lalitaditya Muktapida of Kashmir forming an alliance with Yashovarman of Kannauj, who were otherwise rivals, but common enemy, they would close ranks and defeat them. There were alliances formed with Maharana Bappa Rawal of Mewad, then Vikramaditya, the Chalukya ruler, Danti Durga, the Rashtrakuta ruler, several others. So, north, west, and southern rulers forming alliances and confederacies to keep the Arabs out. When even Ghazni and Ghori and all these Turks made incursions, we are almost told that they had a free pass every time. 17 times he came and we were just sitting like lame ducks.
Yeah.
But you had the Hindu Shahis, of the Northwest Frontier province, who ensured every time that, it made life very miserable for Muhammad Ghazni. And we don't know much about these people, Jaipal, Anandapal, Trilochanpal, Nidar Bhima, several of these names that are there, we don't even strike a bell in anyone's minds. So for 500 years, we pushed back. But at some point, the rubber band, you keep pulling, the elasticity goes, and this sense of, mutual disquiet, which I mentioned here too, and in that book about Rani Naiki Devi in Gujarat, the Chalukyan princess, who manages to defeat Muhammad Ghori in the Battle of Kasarhada. And she asks Prithviraj Chauhan for help. Prithviraj is not very, trustful of her, and he doesn't form an alliance. What his predecessors would have done, 500 years ago. And that was the reason that Naiki Devi won the war, but Prithviraj thought it was not my problem till they came to my gates. And then when he asked Jaichand, Jaichand said, okay, I am not Jaichandra of the Gahadwal empire, who ruled over Kashi, with Kashi as the capital. They could have formed, if say Kashi, then Prithviraj and Naiki Devi together had done what Lalitaditya, Yashovarman and all these Bappa Rawal had done 500 years back, maybe history would have been very, very different. Each of them formed individual battles. And also another terrible thing that most of them did, which Savarkar always called as Sadgun Vikriti, we were subscribing unilaterally to all kinds of virtues of warfare, which right from our Dharma Shastras and Mahabharat we have. Nihat to pe waar nahi karenge, after sunset we will not attack women and children and places of worship. But you were fighting this with a bunch of people who didn't subscribe to those rules. So you're not going to get some gold medal somewhere saying, Acha, you were morally very upright and good. We paid a heavy price for that. So this Sadgun Vikriti, this lack of trust among people, that is what led to this. And finally, with Jayachandra's defeat in 1194 by Kutubuddin Aibak, just 3 years after the Battle of Tarain and Prithviraj Chauhan's defeat, Kashi and Vishwanath and everything there by the entire Doab region, the Indo-Gangetic plains, Antarved, as it was called, all of that was lost and became part of this Delhi Sultanate, which was mushrooming then in the city of Delhi.
So if they had done what their predecessors had done, you are saying that history would have been different.
Totally.
We would not be fighting for the temple today.
Exactly.
Perhaps.
Yeah. But the consciousness, I think, remained after that. And you asked, was interclan rivalry the reason for the inability to reclaim? Because by then there were no clans left to be rivals. It had come fully under the control of the Islamic sultanates, whether it was Delhi, later the Timurid, the Mughal rulers, and after the Mughals, the Awadh Nawabs. And as Maratha power started rising, the Marathas didn't give up on that, as also the Rajput kings. Even after Aurangzeb destroys the Kashi Vishwanath Mandir, a smaller shrine surfaces there, which is secretly visited and worshipped by several Rajput kings. The Rewa, Maharaja of Rewa, the Rana of Udaipur, the Rana of Jaipur, and Mewar. All these people are coming there and worshipping quietly. And the Marathas, I mean, when Vishwanath was destroyed in 1669, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was very much there. And it is said that, his mother, Mata Jijabai, was so angry that she told him, if you are man enough, the goal of your life should be to liberate this. And there are stories and apocryphal stories where even on his deathbed, when he said, now you go and rest in peace, he says, how can I, when Kashi Vishwanath is still not liberated?
He tried to liberate Ayodhya as well.
Yes.
Ram Janmabhoomi as well.
But then, but that became a template of the Maratha Samrajya, that we need this back. And so that's why in this book also I quote letters of Bajirao Peshwa the first, or Nana Sahib, or Madhav Rao, whom you mentioned, and even Nana Fadnavis, when he was part of the Barbhai union for the Savai Madhav Rao. Even during the Anglo-Mysore war against Tipu Sultan, to form a confederacy with the British and Lord Cornwallis, he puts this as a condition: give us back our holy places, then only I will join you against Tipu. But this doesn't materialize for various reasons. So it was not that it wasn't tried out, it was just that it did not work out.
So it's interesting, the parallels that we can draw today, the lessons that we can draw today, that all of them had the consciousness that Kashi should be reclaimed, that the temple should be reclaimed, but our bane was that they couldn't come together and do it as they should have.
Correct. Yeah, but by then the political power was anyway not in their hands to be able to. When it was under the stranglehold of first the Delhi Sultanate, immediately after that the Mughal Empire, then the Awab Nawads, and then the East India Company. That place was politically under someone's capture. So even if all of them came together, you had to negotiate or have a war against that, which was not possible at that time.
So this actually brings me to my next question beautifully, but I'd like to read a passage from your book. It's a little long, so I might have to skip a couple of sentences. But you quote Shering saying that when we endeavor to ascertain what the Mohammedans have left to the Hindus of their ancient buildings in Banaras, we are startled at the result of our investigations. Although the city bestrewn with temples in every direction, in some places very thickly, yet it would be difficult, I believe, to find 20 temples in all of Banaras of the age of Aurangzeb from 1658 to 1707. The same unequal proportion of old temples and as compared with the new is visible throughout the whole of northern India. Moreover, the diminutive size of nearly all the temples that exist is another powerful testimony to the stringency of the Mohammedan rule. It seems clear that for the most part, the emperors forbade the Hindus to build spacious temples and suffered them to erect only small structures of the size of cages for their idols, and these of no pretensions to beauty. The consequence is that the Hindus of the present day, blindly following the example of their predecessors of 2 centuries, commonly build their religious edifices of the same dwarfish size as formerly, but instead of plain, ugly buildings, they're often of elegant construction. Some of them indeed are so delicately carved externally, are so crowded with base beliefs and minute sculpturing, are so lavishly ornamented that the eye of the beholder becomes satiated and varied. In regard to size, there is marked difference between the temples of northern and southern India, the latter being frequently gigantic dimensions. And this is a conversation that often comes up in several conclaves and several Dravidian ideologues, so to speak, have also said this, that the North Indians don't know how to take care of their temples.
Oh my God.
The North Indians,
The
look at
Dravidians are saying that
look
they
at
don't even know how to take care of their temples now.
look at the temples in the south. We are far more cultured and
That's
all of
despite
that.
them.
So my question is that, reading about the extent of destruction of Hindu temples in the northern India, it would almost seem like the south temples are so grand today because the north bore the brunt of Islamic invasion
Cushioned it. So.
and kept fighting so that they wouldn't reach the south. Because you also talk about how the Brahmins from Kashi had migrated to the south to
Yes.
find safer pastures.
Yes.
So, would you say that the south temples today are so grand and untouched through the ages because the north bore the brunt of invasion and the
Yes.
Mohammedan
Yes.
hate towards?
Undoubtedly,
Yeah.
undoubtedly. And I think even in the manner of Sanskrit scholarship or rituals that are undertaken now, or plain chanting, intonation, pronunciation, all of that of Sanskrit mantras and so on, I think there's more pristine. The original version is somewhere preserved. The gigantic temples, whether it is Meenakshi Amman Koil or Brihadishwara Koil, or the Hoysala temples in Belur, Halibid, and other places. All these still retain that beauty. One is, of course, the north cushioned it, but the south also had gigantic empires, the Vijayanagar Empire being one such bulwark. And it was luckier that one after the other, there were attempts made even there. Malik Kafur and others were sent all the way to Srirangam to destroy it, but there was pushback there, and it was not possible to do the scale of damage that was done in the past. And somewhere the Vindhyas became the barrier for them to reach. And by then Vijayanagar was so strong as the Hindu Samrajya. And by the time of the collapse of the Vijayanagar Empire, you quickly had the Marathas coming up, who again kept the whole region safe. So it was a accident of fate and destiny, good destiny for the south. But that doesn't make, at least if I have not myself heard, but if at all someone of the Dravidian movement of all people say that we have maintained this, I think, as I said, it's despite them that these temples are surviving. Look at, they can't even upkeep and maintain these ancient monuments and temples. There's not even money to do daily pujas of the archakas who go almost starve in penury. They are the last of this list
No,
who
but there
even
is
have the right to talk about southern pride and all that.
Yeah, but there's a general, sort of looking down on the north. Not general, of course, but a lot of these elements do look down on the north, saying that, oh, you talk about Hindu pride, and you talk about the cow belt,
Yeah.
quote unquote, and you prove yourself to be such Virat Hindus.
Yeah.
But look at your temples and look at ours. So even if we don't subscribe to the same kind of,
Yeah.
Hindu ethos that you talk about, we still take care of our temples better than you do.
But well, the people in the north, if they are more Virat Hindus, it's more for a reason that they have, borne these attacks much more than people from the south. I come from the south of India. But despite that, I say the same, that, to have the flame glowing in the midst of all odds, I think that deserves so much credit, as also does maintenance and upkeep. So the first one is more difficult, and kudos to the north of India and the entire derisively called cow belt, where you may not find grand temples. Even Ahilyabai's Holkar's temple to Kashi Vishwanath was, compared to what Narayan Bhatt had created just 200 years before her, which was a grand Ashtamandap temple. The more grander it became, it attracted the ire and the attention of a bigot who would come. And you don't know when the hammer would strike. It was always, a preparation for something worse to befall you. That's how the history of North India, the history of these temples has always been. You feel so sad when you see Narayan Bhatt going and Raja Todarmal during Akbar's time in 1580 constructing this grand temple. And you have so many travelers, Peter Mundy, the British factor, there's Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, the French traveler, the Venetian traveler, Niccolo Manucci, all these people coming between 1580 and 1669, talking about the grandeur. You have a sense that oh my God, there's apocalypse coming. There's a worse hammer waiting to fall. So in such a scenario, if uh, the Virat Hindu-ness is coming forth in the genetic font of some of those people, that comes from that flight and fright risk,
The
syndrome.
generational trauma,
Exactly,
so to
that they
speak.
face so much. And in Meenakshi Jain's book Flight of Hindu Deities also,
Yeah.
she documents in such detail how these, all through the northern belt, you had deities moving from one place to the other, being hidden in wells, as here
Yeah.
also in the Gyanvapi well, then going across from Mathura to Nathdwara to all kinds of traumatic experiences. So despite that, to have kept alive, and therefore the aggression or the feeling or the desire to protect something that is at the danger of extinction is naturally going to be higher there.
Mm.
So if someone looks at it derisively, which they shouldn't, I think they're just being totally in cuckoo land.
Now, through the ages, you've written about this in your book in parts, in different chapters. Brahmins kept migrating out of Kashi. They migrated out of Kashi, and then whenever they thought that the situation was slightly better, they migrated back to
Yeah.
Kashi to try and keep the
Flame
scholarship
on.
and the city and the scholarship and all of that alive. In today's time, someone might see a red flag just in that narrative itself because of the vilification of Brahmins,
Yeah.
and because there is this popular narrative now that Hinduism, the religion or the Sanatan Dharma itself, is poorer because the Brahmin class exists. You are a Brahmin yourself. How difficult was it? And as we speak, there's the judiciary and a judge and his family, which is being vilified for saying that the caste system as we know today is not the same as the Jati Varna system back then.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile it? Have you faced backlash for this narrative?
I think Brahmins are the Jews of India, where they were targeted the most, whether by the Islamic bigots or the missionaries or the British government, only because they were the custodians of the education and all the cultural transmission that was happening generation to generation. So if you broke them and broke that spine, it was a spine, so to say, of the entire society. So to break them would ensure that the society falls. And so we've had so many missionary accounts saying till the Brahmin is alive, we can't convert everybody because they're keeping that flame alive. So the demonization of that is something that is obvious to happen. It is only sad that it continues to this date. Luckily so far I don't so much openly wear my Brahmin identity on my sleeve like several others do, because I don't, it's a very personal thing for me. I just happen to be one. Brahmin itself means someone who's in this Brahma Gyan and so on, which I'm not. I mean, just being born in that family doesn't really make you. But there is a bias against Brahmins. The state discriminates against you. Society looks down upon you, and there's so many other discriminatory. If you're a Brahmin and a man in India, I think that's the worst combination to be to be in.
And a historian who doesn't subscribe to the Rabila Thapar,
Exactly.
Irfan Habib school
So
of
there are
thought.
negative, key points on all check boxes are ticked there.
But since you've gone into such detail, not specifically on the subject, but in bits throughout the book, as you trace history of Brahmins coming to Kashi and then leaving Kashi and their contribution, and even if in the incident that we spoke of, how they fasted, attempted to fast unto death for the atonement of Kashi. What was the general contribution of the Brahmin community in the keeping the Kashi flame alive?
Oh man, immense. To make other people have that faith, this was the work of the Brahmin community there. So as you mentioned, most of them migrated after the first waves of iconoclasm to South India to safer pastures. But at that time, for those 4 Brahmin families from Maharashtra, Mauni, Bhatta, Shesha and Dharmadikari, these may be surnames of several people today now, right? We won't even realize that these were the people who went all the way there. And these were the people who also restarted Sanskrit scholarship in Kashi and started composing parishishtas or appendices to the existing Puranic literature, which extolled these Tirthasthans. So they were almost creating an archive. You don't know when the next, as I said, the next acts of iconoclasm will fall. Before that, quickly let us tell, archive it in a literary work. So Lakshmi Dhara's Kritya Kalpataru that he wrote, or later in 1460 you had Vachaspati Mishra from Bihar, Mithila, who wrote Tirtha Chintamani, or Narayan Bhatt who wrote Tristhali Setu, or Mitra Mishra who wrote Tirtha Chudamani, Tirtha Prakash. All these people were saying in Kashi, these are the important spots. This is Vishweshwar. You go so many this thing right, then go this side, there is Tarkeshwar, there is Gauri Shankar, there is this one, there is that one. You're laying out quickly so that it's like creating a literary archive. You don't know when it will all disappear. So they were keeping that memory alive. They were keeping the consciousness of the importance, and each one was also cited. It was like a classic research document of citation and chronicling. So Mitra Mishra, who would come last in this series, he would quote everyone, saying that one says this in. They may not give the date as we know it, but Lakshmi Dhar, who was the earliest one to document about Kashi in 1100s. So his work says this, but this one says this. This one says I'm saying this. So in a way, it's a document. It's a citation that was being done. It was an archival creation that was done. And Narayan Bhatt's successor was this Gaga Bhatt, who actually created the whole Rajyabhishek rules for Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, because by then what it meant to be a Hindu Raja and how do you coronate a Hindu Raja, nobody knew. The memories itself had dissipated over 300, 400 years of Islamic rule. So he created those entire thing, and it was one of his family, the Shastri, the Dravid Shastri, who was there at the Pran Pratishtha of Ram Lalla. Someone from that same family.
Yeah.
It gives goosebumps that this tradition continues to be there even now. And there's also Kavindra Acharya, whom I mention in the book, during Shah Jahan's rule, because you had to pay a huge jizya tax for Hindu pilgrims to go to Kashi, and he was in Kashi, and so he goes all the way to Agra to the Shah Jahan's court with the intercession, of course, of Dara Shikoh, who was probably among the few rare species of conciliatory kind of princes of the Mughal Empire. And he makes a passionate speech to Shah Jahan, and it is said, the eyewitnesses, everyone was so emotional by the passion with which he spoke for the Hindu cause, and Shah Jahan, pardoned the jizya away, and Kavindra Acharya Saraswati comes back to a hero's welcome in Varanasi and all that. Little did he realize that his joy would be so short-lived, because probably 10 years later that temple would be gone. So the role that they all played, and the Peshwas were all Brahmins, their role also not only in the intellectual, keeping the intellectual memory alive, but also the Kshatriya spirit that was there. And you see that later also, Nupur, in my other book on Savarkar, I mentioned about how the Chitpavan Brahmins and the Deshasthas of Maharashtra, the entire revolutionary movement, whether right from Vasudev Balwant Phadke to Chafekar brothers to Savarkar to Gopal Krishna Gokhale to Lokmanya Tilak to Chandrasekhar Azad, you have a long list of all of them who participated, Madan Mohan Malviya, and so all of them in the liberation, and some very violent, what would be called extremist form of liberation. So that spirit, even in that, I mean, there's a letter between the Bombay governor of Bombay, the British governor, and the viceroy, where the Bombay governor writes to him saying, how much ever education and positions we give the Chitpavan Brahmins in government, they are never satisfied, because their angst is they were the ones who ruled this country during the Peshwa era, and we assume that the British took over India from the Mughals, but the intervening period from Attak to Cuttack to Rameshwaram, the subcontinent was under the Marathas. So that angst that this is ours and we need to reclaim it was so strong in the Marathas, particularly the Brahmin community. And so that is all the more reason why these people get demonized more. You had the anti-Brahmin riots of 1948, and even in this book, the demonization of the Brahmin priest, to say they used to rape all the rich pilgrim women who would come and loot their ornaments.
Which historian was it who peddled this nonsense?
Several of them of the Congress dispensation, from Bishambarnath Pandey to Pattabi Sitaramaiah, and then Marxist historians, of course, Gargi Chakravarti, K.N. Panikar, several others. So demonizing the Brahmin, making him appear as this morally defunct and, didn't contribute anything to anything other than just oppression and looting and all of that. This template that was created and then perfected during the Nehruvian era, and also perpetuated in the popular culture. It's always the Panditji who is the wicked guy, scheming, almost, Thakur and Pandit are together, always raping the heroine or something like that. Whereas Rahim Chacha is always very sweet and nice. So, this kind of caricatures that have been perpetuated against communities, that's something that that is really unfortunate and sad. And they're paying a price for this pushback and keeping that flame alive. Because see, just come and just imagine, I mean, all our places of learning were destroyed. Today, if anything of our traditional knowledge systems survive, or even our rituals, our whatever mantras, traditions, if something survives, when all our Takshashila, Nalanda, Vikramshila, everything destroyed, it was these people who, through word of mouth, from teacher to taught, it continued to remain, and that's why they continue to survive. Because how many people will you kill? You can sack one university or burn one library down, but the library is here. So then how many people will you slay? Even today, when I listen to these Ghanapatis who chant, forget the words, even the intonation, right? An udatta swara, an anudatta swara, what goes up, what, it's like without a tape recorder, it is the same voice which would have been heard 5,000 years ago. Not just the word, but also the tune, to have transmitted that over 5,000 years in the wake of so many invasions and attacks and destruction. The archival value of what you're hearing, and as a historian, for me, forget looking at it with all kinds of spiritual connotations and it's holy mantras. For me, just hearing that sound makes me, I still have goosebumps, that this was the same thing that 5,000 years my ancestors ago, they were hearing it in the same way, not doing it only, but everyone was hearing the same voice, the same tone. Someone has preserved it in a tape recorder in the head, in some hard disk, and transmitted it generation to generation. And for that, someone deserves vilification. Then, what else can one say?
What is the evidentiary value of the literary work of these Brahmins who wrote and documented everything through the years? In today's case, for example, what is the evidentiary value?
I think
are those texts relied on?
I think they are. I think in the Hindu case, in this particular, which the Jain father and son duo are fighting, they very much are quoting some of these Puranic literature. They're also quoting these Sanskrit Nibandhas, all those people, scholars whom I mentioned, to show that continuously this place, there's continuity of worship, there's continuity of being sacrosanct. So it's funny and also interesting that how a 11th century text becomes a proof in a secular court in India today, which is something that is probably even the person who wrote it never thought that 800 years later my work is going to be quoted in the Supreme Court of India, independent India, and used as evidentiary proof for the Hindu side to reclaim their place of worship.
Talking about documentation, you mentioned that there is a period between 1200 and 1550 where there is very scarce documentation of what really was going on. And you've termed it as a dark age for Hindus. And you say that there's no first-hand information available about the iconoclasm of that period. And it became so bad that the Brahmins and other families migrated to the south of India, as we said. I want to talk a little bit about why do you think Hindus have not been as great at documenting our own history. As maybe the Jews, I was in Israel in January, and it was remarkable for me to see their capacity to document. There was this large room in the Museum of Holocaust where there were over 1 crore names of the Holocaust survivors documented and displayed for the world to see. Why do you think that we fail so miserably, especially in contemporary times?
Yeah, I think for us, the Holocaust was more a recent phenomenon. Maybe it is easier to relatively, comparatively.
Yeah.
Whereas here it goes on to 1,000 years across such a wide geography and with so many different waves of destruction. We completely forget the Goan Inquisition or
Yeah.
some other part where also there are oral narratives and histories. I think the larger point, I think when it comes to, I don't completely agree to the idea that Hindus lacked a sense of documentation, because we documented, but in a very different way. The Brihadishwara temple, for instance, the walls of the temple has names of some 400 Devdasi, singers and dancers who performed at the Rangamandap. Their names, their emoluments, their mothers' names, their addresses.
Oh wow, I had no idea.
Carved on the walls. What else is documentation? The Cholas left all their evidences in 2 languages, Tamil and Sanskrit, much to the ire of these crazy Dravidians of today. So Sanskrit was very much a part of their lexicon. Yeah. And in triplicates, usually either it would be a copper plate, it would be a palm leaf, and it would be temple wall epigraphic this thing, so that if one is destroyed, something else remains. Kashmir history has been completely documented by Kalhana in the Rajatarangini and the subsequent addendums to that by Jona Raja and several others. Yeah. In distant Assam, right from 1200s to 1800s, during the rule of the Ahoms, you have the Burunjis, which document every detail of the political, social, cultural history of the entire northeastern region. The Maratha history is beautifully documented, the Peshwa Daftars, where every letter that went in and out of the Peshwa courts is documented. Maybe it was not to the extent that, or the manner in which the West looks at history and documentation. And that is a problem for a contemporary modern historian, because today we are all following the von Ranke model of positivist history and evidentiary, evidence-based historiography. So there maybe we don't, this is all poetry form. Like even in this book, there is a Purana story of how Shiva is tricked by Brahma, and then he goes away on an exile. He's forced into an exile, and he loses his kingdom, and then Shiva tries all kinds of tricks and so on himself to come back, and there is a hero's welcome that he's given in Kashi as he comes back to his city. Now, this is a story which was probably written in one of the Puranas of the 12th, 13th century, addendums to the original literature. So, if one looks at it at the face of it, it'll seem like a fairy tale, some stupid story. The Shiva going on an exile is symbolic of the fact that the Shivling had been destroyed then, perhaps, and that he's literally, and Shiva being if he's a supreme god, how could he be tricked by Brahma? So the subtext there is Brahma, the creator, created circumstances of such a nature that Shiva had to exit. So there is a documentary element there, chronicling element, but told in a couched way of a poetry, a poetic form. But you have to extract the kernel of truth in that. But also there is it ends with the ray of hope that one day our Mahadev will come back and there will be celebration. There is a homecoming that will happen. So these type of subtle, stories and so on, it's a hard task, and we've really not built an Indian model to say how do we extract, which again, as we spoke earlier, a lot of us, we just talk and talk and talk, but someone needs to do this, which we also want through our foundation to do. Where can we build an Indian model of historiography where these Puranic literature can be, analyzed, looked into, to say how can we extract any kind of, logical information? Because at the face of it, even in the book, Shering and others say, for a city which is so ancient as Kashi, the Hindu history does very little, justice, because there is no chronology. The Vamshavalis, every king is ruling for some 30,000 years, 1 lakh years, which is difficult to reconcile today. But the Buddhist Jatakas tales, they do better justice. because there's more, practical data and information that is embedded. There should be a mechanism through which can we extract the historicity of our itihasas, the Mahabharata, Ramayana, the Puranic literature, their holy stories, their social impact, that apart. What is the historic kernel that can be extracted from our itihas? Very little work has been done on that. That is the saddest part.
It's mostly dismissed as mythology
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
most historians. But you're saying that all of this has a kernel of truth, and
Yeah.
it was just told differently from how
Yeah.
the West understands.
I mean, how Kalhana puts it, it's a very evocative shloka. Dharmartha kama mokshanam upadesha samanvitam kathayuktam puravrittam itihasam ta chakshmate. Puravrittam, or narratives of the past told to you in a kathayuktam, in the form of a story, which help you in the attainment of the four purusharthas of dharma, artha, kama and moksha, and which have upadesha samanvitam. There has to be a didactic element, moral code of conduct for society, do the do's and don'ts and all. Itihasata chakshmate, that is called history, which itself translates to it thus happened. So there is a very straightforward, what is the utility of writing history? So it should be entertaining, it should chronicle facts, and as it happened, it should also have a moral fiber to the society, and it should help in the four attainment of purusharthas, which is virtue, wealth, karma, and also salvation. So just see the gamut of what the utility of history writing for our ancestors was. It was not just dry chronicling of documents and facts. So if one looks at it through that perspective and brings an Indic model or a Hindu model of historiography, which is so direly in need, instead of just talking about it that we have such a great tradition, can we articulate it? Can we actually use? So that's why in the foundation, what we're trying to do is work with Sanskrit scholars. Sanskrit scholars and Pandits have not used their Sanskrit knowledge, according to me, I may be wrong. Maybe people who are seeing the podcast in the comments, they'll berate me for this, I'm not sure. But as far as I know, Sanskrit scholars have used their Sanskrit expertise for philosophical, grammarian fights and so on, or karmakand, puja part and so on, never for historical research. Whereas the entire wealth of this country's story is embedded in Sanskrit texts, Pali, Prakrit, all the classical languages. So the other point that was mentioned in this book too, that people did not, I think that's a fault, huge fault in the Indian psyche itself of documentation. While overall documentation may be done, but as was mentioned, angst of common people, who were either they were kept and those records were destroyed, we don't know. But by and large, first-hand accounts of what the suffering meant, somebody writing their own story. I think the self-effacing world of Indian or Hindu philosophy saying we are not important. The larger idea, the knowledge is important. Even when it comes to the arts, when I wrote even biographies of artists in the past, it's very difficult to write that in India. You can write treatises on music and dance and painting and all of that, but what did it mean to be an artist, a singer, a dancer in the 17th century, 18th? Very few of them left behind accounts, a diary. Whereas in the West, you go to Vienna, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart,
absolutely.
their every small detail of what they did would be documented that way. We somehow feel very, I'm so less as an individual. The art, the knowledge, the philosophy, the idea is so much more important and bigger than the individual.
The person,
So the individual starts getting subsumed so much that as a result, these individual stories of what it would have been, they would have. In the Delhi launch, Nirmala Sitaramanji mentioned a beautiful, anecdote of when Kashi was in turmoil. There was angst everywhere. There were, I think, some marauding army. We don't know the date and all those things. But in one of those iconoclastic waves, and she mentioned that story as to how people were just running, in fright to better, safer pastures. And there were several men, women, children running through the forest, deep jungles. And one such lady, apparently, she was like full term pregnant and so on. And on the way, she delivers. and the family is unable to carry the baby, so they wrap it up in a piece of cloth and just put it in the tree trunk and continue to run. After a while, the mother is so drawn. Imagine she's just had to deliver a child and immediately run for her life and leave the child behind in a tree trunk. After a few kilometers, pulls her back, and she says, "I want to go back to that child whom I left behind." And she goes running back, and then that is the child that was there was the famous saint Vallabhacharya, apparently.
Oh, wow.
And so she comes to the tree trunk. The child has not yet been devoured by the wild animals. It is the effulgence and the prabhavali of the child pulls the mother towards it, and that's how she takes the child back and runs along. So this, if the mother had written a diary somewhere and that had survived, just imagine the historical value, the archival value, the personal element of what the angst of the people would have been. So few accounts of those exist, and that is a huge fault of ours. At least I think today, maybe social media is our diary where we are documenting every day. So many of our travails, you keep writing on your Twitter that we are documenting our end day by day. But even if we are doing that, we are at least documenting now, which our ancestors somehow either they didn't have the thought, or it's so alien to our philosophy and worldview itself, saying let's talk about better things. What is so great about our story? But they didn't realize the historical value that 200, 300 years later, somebody would have had for this.
I think everybody has that thought that we're all squirrels, we're all round squirrels, and therefore the squirrel doesn't matter. It's the preservation of Setu and the Lord Ram who matter. So I understand.
Yeah.
And this has been troubling on many levels because I'm not a historian. I can only read the books that historians like you write. And throughout the past 15 years, every time I want to read, the only thing that pulls me back is which book do I pick up to make sure that I am not wired differently by the end of the book and I'm not fed incorrect information. So it's so important what you and your foundation are now attempting to do, not for our generation. Maybe our generation is now set in their ways, but at least for our children, they'll have something to look forward to. My last two questions, because I know you're in a rush. The ASI survey, when it happened in the disputed structure, it was found that the inscription of Aurangzeb, which ordered the mosque construction, was actually destroyed.
Yeah.
Or there were attempts to at least destroy it. And the ASI compared it with a photograph that they had taken a few years ago. And then they realized that there was a destruction. We also know about the Wuzu Khana, where Shivling, where Baba was there, they were washing their dirty feet. And I know from your other interviews that you believe that people knew that Baba is there. So have there been other instances where in contemporary times, in the past 50 years or so, there have been attempts to destroy evidence in the manner that ASI documented in their survey?
Destroy evidence or fabricate it. Evidence will come only once an archaeological excavation happens. And so fabricated history ends where archaeological excavations begin. And that is why the entire cabal of leftist historians or their votaries, or even in Ayodhya or here, there is so much of opposition to archaeological excavation. Because till that happens, these people can fabricate lies and make these stories like this. In this case, even in the Ayodhya case, the lies around that Vishnu Hari inscription, which fell from the structure on 6th December, which people of the so-called eminence of Irfan Habib and others also lied in court, and their subordinates also did that. But these epigraphic evidences can't lie. It's carved in stone, literally and figuratively. So that is why nobody wants to do that. But so you can destroy evidence till the time the evidence comes up. So here the opposition is to not even have the evidence come out. And if it is going to come out before that, try to destroy it. So oppose the excavation, but till then you fabricate history so much and tell a lie 100 times so beautifully and with all the word salad and a sophistry of intellectual sophistry, that you bedazzle everyone, and everybody is so benumbed to actually take your fairy tales as truth. So that has been, I think, the modus operandi so far. There's so little evidentiary proof that even we've not looked for much evidence. We were told always that including Ashoka had the Kalinga War and then
then
converted to Buddhism, and Buddhism as the peace, while in Hinduism it's almost like a missionary version. You have a dark heart. The minute you embrace Christ, it's golden effulgence and all of that, which is what is the pictures shown to people, indigenous communities in various parts of India. So similar narrative there, but nobody went to the evidence there or the inscriptions where 2-3 years before Kalinga he was already a Buddhist. So then these things can be spun with so much of finesse, and the influential nature of the people who spun those yarns, and then those are perpetuated through popular media, whether it's cinema, all of this, books and everything, media per se, that it's almost dinned into our heads, and we generally, we don't investigate much. We are in a state of stupor. There's no awakening. We take it for granted. So every time we think of Akbar, we will think of Mughal-e-Azam, and he's so handsome, like Hrithik Roshan, or deep sonorous voice like Prithviraj Kapoor and all of that, whereas he was probably some 5-footer, very bad looking, and probably didn't even speak the language. He spoke in some other language which we never understood. So these details are perpetuated in this manner.
So my last question.
Yes.
Because you mentioned that I keep repeating, we are documenting our end. My takeaway from this book, when I read it cover to cover, was twofold. One, where are our Brahmins who are going to document each and every insult and each and every episode of aggression? And where are our Rajputs who defended the pillar of Bhairav and the temple? In today's time, who do you see filling these roles? Because I don't see anybody, sadly.
That's very pessimistic of you.
I'm paid to be a pessimist. I keep repeating that.
Yeah. So I wouldn't take such a pessimistic view. I think things are changing now. There is an awakening for sure. And this is far gone beyond, a political party, individual, and all these things. They certainly were the catalyst to this thing. But there is widespread awakening now. And we saw that even during the Ayodhya ceremony, that common Indians who had nothing to do with the Sangh Parivar or BJP or anything, there was fervor, there was devotion, there was a wave of devotion all over the country. So people who are writing books like this, and there is a new generation of writers who are documenting history in the manner that it is, right from, of course, our senior generation, which continues to write, whether it's Konrad Elst or Meenakshi Jain, who are still writing. In my own generation, there are people like Sanjeev Sanyal, Anand Ranganathan, Sai Deepak, and so many others who are writing books. They would form the new Brahmin class, whatever be their caste by birth. But this is the knowledge production that is happening and the awakening that it is contributing in. And today, more than street fighting that the Rajputs did, people like Vishnu Shankar Jain and Hari Shankar Jain, they would be our dharmic warriors, or Sai Deepak himself in several cases. I think he's both a Rajput and a Brahmin there, which is a rare feat, where you're also fighting these in courts against much odds. In this book, I document how the kind of intimidations, the kind of allurements and threats that were given to the Jain father and son. And despite that, if they had to go on and they continue to go on to do that, that's being Rajput enough. You don't literally have to take the sword everywhere and go and cut off someone's head, but you're fighting these against all odds. And some of us are writing all of this against all odds. You're documenting all of this through the media. That is both the intellectual Kshatriya, the Brahmin, the Kshatriya, both the things coming there together. There are people who are financing all of this. They are the Vaishyas who are helping this whole process. and the large army which is also consuming all of this, which is the rest of the population. So I do not take this that so pessimistically that it's not a very great situation to be in. It is a ticking bomb on which one is sitting, but I would still like to see that there is hope. As in how more and more people are awakened, more and more people are actually aware of what's happening. There is angst that builds up, and call to action comes only from that angst. First awareness, then the angst, and then the action. So in the 3 A's that are there, I think at some point we are heading towards that, where we take assertive, collective, united action. And rather than fight amongst ourselves, I know that the non-left side is also famous for fighting so much amongst ourselves, and which is okay, but let's not again become a Nike Devi, Prithviraj Chauhan, Jai Chand, scenario. For common causes, it's good to, even if there are slight ideological differences, those should be subsumed, and for the larger cause. If you have to fight a common, opponent, which is not necessarily only of a different faith, but also ideological, then you need to close in ranks rather than keep having rancor amongst yourself. That also, I think, is very important, which we should learn from history. Otherwise, we'll be bound to repeat those same mistakes again and again and again. And this time, this is a once in a civilization's lifetime chance that we are getting. I think history and destiny are being very kind to us at this moment of our existence. At this point, if we lose this chance, I don't know, maybe the next chance will come after 500 or 1000 years. By then, we don't know what the shape and the nature and the texture of this country would have turned out to become. So, we are all being called upon with a lot of responsibility by destiny, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, to stand up and be counted. And through this podcast, I think that is the larger message I would like to give to all the listeners, that stand up to be counted for a common cause, which is much larger than your individual egos, your individual glories and aggrandizements, because that can happen all through your lifetimes, which is anyway a small lifespan. But the span of this country, the civilization, I think that is more important than all of us, some of all of us put together.
I think the last question and the last answer summarizes this book perfectly, because you start feeling extremely despondent as you read through the initial, 3/4 of the book, and then you find hope when you talk about the Jain, father and son duo, when you talk about Hari Shankar Jain ji and Vishnu Shankar Jain and how they are fighting to reclaim
a minority again.
The temple. Yes. So I think the last question sort of encompasses the book. You're going to feel despondent like I do all the time. I'm a professional pessimist in that manner. And you travel to the eternal optimist, ending with the hopes that we will reclaim Kashi soon.
Because that's what our Puranas asked us to do. So when Divodasa, the usurper of Shiva's throne, was there and Shiva went on exile, we didn't end with that this thing that Shiva was wandering in the forest and sad and despondent, and he did every trick in the game. He sent Vishnu to disguise himself as a Buddhist monk, and Lakshmi comes as a Buddhist nun, and they spread adharma in the society, and Divodasa becomes unpopular, and using all this subterfuge. So Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed, there's no right and wrong, no Sadgun Vikriti here. You can even use trickery and all kinds of things to eliminate your opponent. And finally, there is homecoming. Finally, Mahadev aa jayenge wapis. Finally, there is celebration. So our Puranas, our scriptures are giving us that hope. So why should we become hopeless? So, if you're true to your scriptures, then be true to it to the last
To
tea.
the last tea. On that extremely positive note, you said Baba aayenge, you said Vapas aayenge, and 100% Vapas aayenge. Thank you so much.
On Mahashivratri, for us to be doing this, that is the best.
We are having this conversation on Mahashivratri. And thank you so much.
Thank you
for doing a job that I know brings a lot of grief and a lot of loneliness, but it also brings a lot of happiness, knowing, I'm sure, that you're contributing to our next generation being not as blind as our generation was or our previous generation was forced to be. So thank you so much for your service. And thank you so much for dedicating this time to me. I know you're very pressed for it, but you still sat with me for 1.5 hours. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
To everybody, please buy this book. It's not because it's a commercial book that you'll enjoy flipping through. It's not like a Sidney Sheldon read, but it's an important read for you, and it has the stories that we need to pass on to our children so they remember what our ancestors did, and they also know the Pitru Rin that they have to reclaim our temples. Thank you.
Thank you, Nupur.